Yeah.
How are you doing? What's your reality? What are you experiencing right now? How are you processing key moments or critical junctures in your life? And what are you doing to hopefully progress and move through that or mature or grow?
Welcome to the Nouveau podcast, the podcast that models healthy communication for men, empowering them to start the journey of self-work. Now here's your host, Thomas Pierce.
Welcome, everybody. This week's guest is Nico. Nico and I were classmates in college, or for those of you on the metric system, university. I'm looking at you, Hayden. So Nico and I didn't interact a ton at school, but I just had a feeling that he was going to be a really interesting person to talk to. And wow, was that a correct intuition? He really blew me away with how thoughtful, articulate, and genuine he was. This is an awesome, awesome conversation. Enjoy. Lift off. Good morning, Nico.
Morning, Thomas.
Thanks so much for taking the time to chat. I'm really excited to hear what we come up with today.
Absolutely. Pleasure to be here.
For sure. So we went to school together at GW, and I saw some of your activity on LinkedIn recently, and I wanted to have you on because when I was thinking about you in class, I remember you seemed like a very cool dude. First of all, I was like, this dude's cool. Like he's got it going on, whatever it is, like he's cool. But I noticed that you seemed very thoughtful too. It didn't seem like you would observe first and kind of hold yourself very well and carry yourself well. So those are my initial impressions of you.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that, man. I'm no cooler than any other guy walking down the street, but I think that the point you made, the second point around how I hold myself or how I'm kind of observing things is spot on. My sort of mentality or mindset whenever I step into a new space or new room is, how do I make sense of it? How do I kind of just take a step back and see what's happening here? Who's speaking? Who's kind of observing? Who's really out here just doing stuff? And I try to make that sort of a priority in any situation that I step into, right? How do I make sure that I don't want to say close my mouth, but make sure I'm just really listening and focusing on taking in my surroundings before I decide how I want to act. And I've always just been that way. It's always important for me to make sense of my surroundings before I decide to proceed in any sort of way.
Do you know where you learned that from?
Yeah, I think it's probably a combination of things. I'd have to give my parents some credit, specifically my dad. I think he always tells me, you have 2 ears and one mouth. And so I think listening,
nice.
It's always been something about that for me, right? I think, he's always been super good about that. But I think also I've moved so much in my life. And one thing you learn when you move from place to place to place is being adaptable and being flexible and being a great listener and a keen observer. Because each environment you're taking in is completely different. I've had, and we can get into this further, but I've had stops in Seattle, San Francisco, Atlanta, New York, Chicago, Pennsylvania, Washington, D.C., obviously for school. And so each and every time I'm making those different moves and different steps, they're all different. They're not the same. The people are different. The spaces, the city, the architecture, all of it is different. And you'd be a fool to kind of just step in and say, hey, I'm going to take my understanding of what I was doing over here in Chicago and apply that same sort of logic to where I'm in Atlanta, and things will be perfect. Different ball game, different landscape, different environment. So I think it's just really important to just take things in and try to make sense of it first.
For sure. I wonder if that's almost a self-protection mechanism as a young person, right? As a kid.
Yeah, man. Ooh, you're getting to it now. You're getting to the good stuff. But I think so. And I'm actually glad you said that, because I think it was that's something that I kind of developed, I think, along my journey, where I realized that because I was on the go so much, because I was moving, that in order for me to feel safe in certain spaces, I had to be comfortable first. I was never someone to just dive right in and get to it. I always watched other people kind of do that first and said, maybe I would have done that, but I've done it a little bit differently, right? And I kind of get the benefit of that. I think a lot of folks that maybe don't dive first, they may miss some things, but they also get the experience of seeing where others may have misstepped or maybe have been a bit overzealous. And so definitely would agree that I think I did some of that for my safety. and also just really think it was me just trying to be thoughtful around what was happening in front of me.
For sure. And that whole concept of spaces and safety is something I've been, becoming more aware of, just acknowledging how, whiteness is centered in our country and how, my perspective has never really been challenged in that way, or my safety, right, on the day-to-day basis is not put into question.
Yeah.
So I can imagine, especially with that and in combination with being in new cities every couple of years, it sounds like. Yeah. So a chameleon of sorts.
You can say that. I guess so.
That's dope, man. Yeah. So I guess let's go to org sci, because we studied a pretty interesting major. We were grateful to have that experience where it seems like people like Dr. Nils Olson just kind of woke up one day and said, let's make up this major.
Yeah. No, I totally hear you and totally agree, but it was a blessing, man. I think you really said it best, where I think there was a lot of folks that were straddling that line of liberal arts and having some business interest and wanting to work in a corporate space, but not wanting to necessarily do financial analysis, not necessarily wanting to just be straight business majors. And so this concept of organizational psychology, which was more formally organizational behavior, org sciences at GW, was a great combination for me of saying, how do I come into an organization, for all of us to come into an organization and be able to diagnose issues from a people perspective or organizational perspective. And so a bit of a sort of a rare kind of unique major, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I found it super late. I'm not sure when you found it yourself, but I didn't really get going, I think, until it was probably the end of my sophomore year, beginning of my junior year. And I was so, lucky to have found it. And each course was really interesting and fascinating. And you talk about people like Nils Olson, just great guy, always focused on helping you out with the research, questions, all of that. There was a ton of great professors in that space. And I really enjoyed it. I don't know how your experience was, but I thought it was a really good time studying that.
For sure. It was fascinating. And I think it really appealed to the student in me, because it was kind of this abstract. It was very, very abstract in some ways. It was like, how do we organize? I'm not going to use the word organizations. How do we structure groups of people so that people feel productive and heard? And one of the biggest things that I still laugh about is just the concept of how to make people feel seen and heard at work. And basically the research just says, ask them what they think. And it doesn't even matter if you implement or even listen to what they say, but just asking them what they think about their workplace makes people feel so much more heard.
It's fascinating, right? I mean, and I think we've taken a bit different career paths. With someone that's kind of stayed along this like line of HR and human capital, so much of what we do in our annual employee engagement survey is soliciting that feedback. It's being thoughtful around what questions we're asking, how we're asking them, and also being mindful of making sure, saying, hey, in comparison to last year, we have great data from last year. How do we make sure that we're not just, even though we want to tie in year over year trending, let's make sure that we're not being insensitive to asking questions that maybe we didn't really action that well this past year, right? If there's been some sort of discrepancy or people are upset around, let's say, rewards and recognition, how do we make sure that, we're still trying to get good data, that we're not necessarily asking the same question if you haven't done anything about it, right? So to your point, asking is extremely important. Also need to be thoughtful really around what we're going to do with that data and what we're going to action, and making sure that we're just being thoughtful about that, I think, is important.
For sure. And for my own understanding, and there probably are young people listening to exploring career paths, what is an HR business partner?
Yeah, absolutely. An HR business partner really is a thought partner to any business leader from a people perspective, right? And so I guess if you take a step back, a P&L leader or a business leader really has responsibility for growing a business from a revenue perspective or from a profit perspective, right? And so they have partners that aid them in that outside of the business, right? So you have a financial partner, you have an HR partner, you have a comms partner, communications, marketing. Your HR business partner looks at your organization and says, from a people perspective, are we set up for success? Meaning, do we have the right talent? Do we have the right skill set? Is our succession planning, meaning, our successors to people that are in critical roles, are they in place? Do we have the right training and development in place? All these things are going to help aid the business leader reach their business goal, right? So I get excited about that role because I think it's a great way to kind of take a step back, look at the org across different role levels, different roles, and say, hey, with who we have in-house right now and what we've been given from leadership, are we able to reach our goals in an effective way? And if we're not, do we need to go external to get that talent? Do we need to internally move someone? How do we make sure that we're set up for success from a people perspective? I guess it's the simplest way I can describe it.
That's great. I mean, it seems like very forward thinking. And is it something that only organizations at a certain scale have?
I think it's a tough question to answer. So I'd say like this: most traditional large multinational corporations will have HR business partners in troves, supporting different businesses. There's a lot of different thought process around the correlation or the sort of the balance between HR business partner to employee population. I think sometimes the ideal numbers like maybe one HR business partner supports 400 to 500 people managers within a business. Sometimes that number's as high as 700 to 800. I've seen other places, but I think it depends. Sometimes in startups, to kind of pivot now a bit, there's that thing where, as we're going through Series A, as we're going through funding and different sort of things, there's the right time to kind of bring in that HR presence. And that person probably is going to be a bit more of a generalist. And when I say generalist, really, I mean like a jack of all trades. I think most startups probably wouldn't really need a specific HR business partner until they reach a certain employee headcount, and they've secured some of their funding, right? So I think it's really just finding the right time and place. But most traditional corporations will have that, and they're really key people in making sure that there's organizational success. I think I don't want to go on a soliloquy here, but I think there's a lot of different perspectives around how valuable is HR to the business. And so long as you're incorporating that workforce planning, you're being a thought partner, you're being strategic, you're being forward thinking, you're highlighting how making key people decisions affects the bottom line, your opinion should be valued. You should have a seat at the table.
For sure. Yeah, that's interesting. The last organization I was at, there was a lot of awareness around, who's a cost center and who's producing. Mm-hmm. So that's interesting you said that, because I'd imagine at some point you do have to, or any HR team has to justify their numbers and point to, hey, we were going to say hire 5 more people, but actually my team was able to analyze it and come to the decision that 3 people would get the job done, and we saved you $200,000.
100%. It's great you say that, right? The cost savings and the efficiencies, right, in terms of headcount. And so I actually did quite a bit of that work in my previous role, just looking across and saying, hey, how can we highlight or demonstrate that we're being thoughtful and that we are making key decisions to save money and like meaningful amounts of money, right? So those are key decisions that HR business partners have to make as well. And to your point, when you use that example of we thought it was 5 roles and it was 3 roles, you're able to actually kind of even look at it a bit deeper and say, hey, if we think we're going to hire maybe 4 or 5 senior related roles, can we actually maybe bring in some more junior related roles that still can support that work, but promotes upward mobility, meaning that these people will sit in this role for maybe a year and a half to 2 years. We'll promote them internally. They'll be satisfied. And we're actually saving more money doing that, bringing them in at a lower base salary, promoting them to that space as opposed to kind of getting that externally and paying a premium on that sort of price, right? So all of that is a great example of what a good HR business partner should do.
Sneaky businesses, man.
Yeah.
No, sneaky is not the word. It's efficient. It's how to keep the doors open.
Yeah.
So is this then the kind of job that you come in as like an HR generalist and with more experience? Because this sounds like kind of like the sexy side of HR. Like, this sounds interesting.
Yeah.
There's some strategy. I would imagine one can't just walk in right after graduation and say, I'm going to be your HR business partner.
Yeah, typically not. I'll give you a really brief career walk of what it looks like. Typically, what you really do come out of school is you probably be an HR analyst somewhere, right? And so that really is going to comprise of you just supporting, different HR generalists, different HR efforts across the board, and you really should be more on the reporting and the metric side and supporting stuff and, getting meetings and all of that, right? The progression to kind of the next thing is probably either a senior HR analyst or an HR generalist. HR generalists are jack of all trades, so they're really supporting compensation, talent, leadership development, rewards and recognition, comp, all those different things, but much more in a transactional way. And so they're providing direct support to HR business partners. They're kind of the first to sort things out, kind of go through the data, make some solid recommendations, but probably in a less client-facing way, in a more transactional way. And then the further step beyond generalist, obviously, is business partner, where now you're kind of being a bit more strategic. You're able to kind of face off with the client more. You are kind of the most client-facing HR person, as part of the HR organization. And so you have that responsibility to really be a thought partner and bring value there. And that's just kind of the sort of generalist track. But I think that's a good way of describing it, kind of analyst, senior analyst, generalist to HR business partner.
Nice. That's awesome. That's interesting and good to know.
Yeah.
For me as well.
Absolutely.
Cool. So you work in this place where you get to think and use your brain around the psychology of the workplace and human behavior and how people interact with their employer. Have there been moments or what are the moments when you have seen things that are applicable to personal lives too? Because we all bring our personal life to work. It's not talked about. It's kind of under this like sheen of the professional presentation, but have you noticed any things that are like lessons that are applicable from what you've learned at work into someone's personal life too?
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing I think about is probably around this time last year, there was a ton of conversation around diversity, equity, and inclusion across all organizations. And there was this mad dash to host town halls and forums and conversations. Let's talk about all this stuff, all this sort of racial reckoning that we're having in this country. We've been having for years. And I think I remember myself being squarely in that, and each and every day being confronted with this choice of how do I show up, and do I have the sort of physical and mental endurance to keep going here and showing up and being a voice and being positive and trying to be part of the solution. And you kind of asked really around like life lessons or sort of personal lessons that apply to personal life. I think for me, as challenging as it was, I chose to lead with vulnerability, and I chose to lead with emotional depth and honesty and transparency around what my experiences were. And a lot of those moments were tough. A lot of moments I probably hadn't envisioned me having to, really endure in my workplace, in my work environment. But I saw it as a responsibility, and I saw it as me being like, you know what? I need to be able to look back on this and feel like I did my part and I did the work and that I was part of the solution here. And not that it falls or, is the responsibility of all people of color to, share their trauma or share what has happened to them for people to understand that. I think it's actually kind of challenging and a bit of an issue in some ways when that's called upon too much. But I did feel a responsibility in terms of the folks that have come before me, thinking about my grandma, thinking about my dad, thinking about my other coworkers and things that they've endured. So I felt that, and I was 100% trying to lean into my most authentic self, and just lean in with a lot of vulnerability and honesty.
That's incredible, man. I'm beaming just to hear you speak about that and be so vulnerable, man. Thank you, and I think that is extremely selfless of you to see something that, is a cultural challenge and more than a challenge. It's, we know what it is. And to see that and to feel that sense of responsibility and say, you know what, I have an opportunity to better this moment, and to do that is pretty incredible, dude. I think hats off to you, honestly.
Yeah, I appreciate that, man. And it was a challenging thing for me to really arrive on, because I think there's like I said, the other sort of spaces, it's not my responsibility to do this. People should just understand this. Why does my pain have to be a lesson or put on display for people to understand that? But that sort of mentality, what it does or what it creates is just a sense of, okay, well, if I'm not going to share and these other people aren't going to share, what could possibly change? I mean, this moment's going to happen and things are going to go on and people will forget about this. And that's a larger conversation really around how corporate America is tackling DE&I work, and we can get to that. But I just felt that responsibility in the moment to kind of say, hey, like, this is how real this is for some people. And I'm sure my experience is pale in comparison to some of my colleagues. And obviously hearing some of their stories is really painful too. But I just wanted to make sure that, I didn't opt out or I didn't check out in that sort of way. That would have felt a bit irresponsible and a bit just selfish, I think, on my part. So really was challenging, but glad I did it when I look back on it.
Dude, fuck yeah. And I think that's an important note for the white people in the audience. What you mentioned was, when these conversations are happening about D&I, racial sensitivity, I don't even like that term. It's just more just acknowledging that one of the lived experiences, right,
Yeah.
of people of color. Yeah. And you mentioned this moment where these conversations happen and the burden gets put on the people of color to talk.
Yeah.
And what I've been learning in pursuing this conversation is that it's on us white people to participate. And definitely, I think a lot of the feedback I've gotten is that there's some hesitancy to overstep.
Yeah.
But I would argue it's worse to not participate than to say something and say the wrong thing, because 100%. If it's done in goodwill and it's done authentically,
yeah,
it's going to be a good thing.
You're 100% right, man. We always preach this in my press role, at least in my HR organization, and as I go into my new space. It's better to try and to make an effort and maybe make a misstep than to opt out or to feel as if I'm not going to do this right, so I don't want to do it. Nothing changes from that perspective when people opt out, right? And so what we always try to stress is that in order for any organization to really embed D&I work across the enterprise and to have it be meaningful and not have it just be an HR exercise, it starts at the top of the house. We need leadership, which tends to be more often white men, to lead the charge, to be out there, to be vocal, to really be, adopters of that, to hold folks accountable for that, embedding that in terms of their overall organizational goals. I see a lot of HR organizations out here now tying long-term incentives to D&I goals in terms of bonuses and things like that. It's important, and I think that it starts from the top, right? I think the thing that we all were acknowledging or all thought around is if people of color could lead the charge and really could do that, we wouldn't be sitting here in 2021, right? We've been trying, we've been doing these things, we've been making these efforts, right? It's not for our lack of effort. It's sometimes the lack of sponsorship we get sometimes from the top. And so this past year has been, I think, a bit exciting, where I've seen more people express more interest and people having genuine care and wanting to learn. I mean, I had countless conversations with colleagues that wanted to learn more around what they could do to help, and all that was extremely positive. And I think there's tons of initiatives going across different spaces and different industries where people are really trying to find the right answers. Don't think that anyone has solved it yet, really, or has figured it out holistically. But I think there's a new sense of energy and invigoration around finding the right solution, and it's something that I'm excited to keep going and keep pursuing in my career pursuit as well.
For sure, and I had a similar, I guess how this podcast is a result of last year as well, because I started thinking about how can I participate, how can I contribute in a positive way to this conversation. Mm-hmm. And I've repeated this a bunch of times on here, just thinking about conceptualizing the situation, right? It's like, okay, so we have identified the problems. We've identified that there is a social hierarchy, from the founding of the country that benefits straight white men, mm-hmm. right? It used to be land owning, now it's with a college degree, whatever the, we can make those parallels. And I was thinking about, okay, who do I have access to? Well, it's a bunch of white people that I grew up with. And if I start a podcast, they'll probably listen to it. And if I can normalize these conversations and encourage other white people who I have access to think about these things and start these conversations with their own families, that could be a good thing. Because that's another thing I learned is that, as a white person, I have access to spaces that someone of color may not have access to.
Right.
Just because of our families and who we grew up with. And, it's kind of using the natural inclination of people to form in-groups to our advantage.
Yeah, no, 100%. I'm glad you did that, man. I feel like it's folks like you that are actively trying to help be part of the solution, right? That are focusing on what's my part, what role can I play, and the fact that you're trying to bring awareness to this issue, you're trying to spread a message, you're trying to invite other folks on and offer their perspective, are all positive things that I think move the needle in a really thoughtful way. So, and I appreciate you doing this. I wish more folks would do this, and I feel like it's all going to contribute to us hopefully being better in our society going forward.
For sure. And more empathy is really one of my core goals, because I looked at the modeling for men, for all men in the culture, you know, like Rogan, for example. He's like the white guy Oprah. You know, he didn't want to be that. He didn't go out with that goal, but that's the reality. And I think, you know, he definitely has some empathetic modeling and is, you know, a good dude, it seems. But I think we need more of this kind of deeper conversation, self-reflection, asking for help, acknowledging our weaknesses, to be more mainstream instead of just talking about sports and how much beer we drank last weekend.
Yeah, you know, I couldn't agree more. I think you make a good point. I listen to a lot of different, you know, podcasts on Spotify, and when you focus in on the top of the charts around what those topics are, typically it's a lot more informal conversation around whether it be women or sports or cultural phenomena or moments, and dissecting that and talking about that, which is all, some of that's interesting stuff, right? I'd say some of those topics probably shouldn't be discussed or are discussed in disparaging ways. But I think, to your point, some of the great content and some of the better podcasts that don't get recognition are tackling some of those more difficult issues. And that's sort of a shame, right? So I think, to your point, the more we can normalize the fact that what men care about and what men discuss should go beyond the expanse of, you know, the game and IPAs and all of that, the better we are as sort of men. Right? So I'm fully in your camp. I'm fully in your boat. I feel like, as someone that's, even from, you know, being a young guy, I always felt that I've been in touch with my emotions, and I've had more, you know, an emotional side to certain things. In the most recent years, I've been really thinking around, how do I either contribute or create a space that promotes that? And so I too am trying to be part of the solution and say, hey, you know, been there, done that. We've discussed this thoroughly, right? Like, what else? You know, like what else is going on underneath the surface, man? Beyond what we talked about before. You know, how are you doing? What's your reality? What are you experiencing right now? How are you processing key moments or critical junctures in your life? And what are you doing to hopefully progress and move through that, or mature or grow?
For sure, bro.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I am really curious to hear how you came to that. I mean, the moving around is a good one. For me, I was really lucky to have this friend group in high school where we would just be super transparent. And I think it was a mixture of, you know, high school is a challenging time, and a lot of my buddies had a combination of divorces happening, mental health issues, suicidal depression, you know, dealing with sexuality, not being straight, dealing with, you know, crazy home situations. So all of those things were happening. And luckily we had we were in a high school setting that allowed us to be, the school was awesome, man. It facilitated that kind of environment. It was all boys school, and there definitely is a ton of ingrained misogyny and systemic racism that we're working to undo from an alumni perspective. But despite that, it facilitated those conversations, and I think kind of set me on the path I'm on. Yeah. But do you know have you thought about what it was for you?
Yeah, I think I definitely look at my experience moving around a lot as a key sort of thing that happened to me that I didn't have a ton of control over, that I really was able to start uncovering how I was feeling. And so each and every move felt different. A lot of times, as a little kid, it felt like a lot of sadness, a lot of loss, a lot of frustration, grief over what could have been in terms of certain spaces. Or I think one of the most critical moves I had was leaving the north suburbs of Chicago as an 8th grader. At that time, at 14, thinking that, you know, my middle school friends, my elementary school friends were all going to go to the same high school, and we were going to go off and do all this stuff and play sports together, and you know, all these girls that we liked growing up and all these different things. And that was all in front of me, and it felt like it was snatched away when I moved out to California. which I'm extremely thankful I'm moving to California now. But at the time when I was 14, I felt like, my world was collapsing in on me. And so moving, I think, always allowed me to have to reinvent and recreate myself in a way that was going to be conducive to my environment. And a lot of that meant getting in touch with how I was feeling and trying to process those feelings each and every time I was upping and moving. I think another thing that really helped was in my high school, I'd say, and I went to a Catholic high school over in the Bay Area. So much of the curriculum that we focused in around was around faith and things like that. And that was helpful, not in the sense of just like religion and what that represents, but more so around the conversations that brought. And so a critical experience for me was we had this retreat that we would host sort of every year for our seniors. It was called Kairos. A lot of, private institutions or religious institutions do a similar sort of retreat. And it's kind of focused on self-enlightenment and reflecting and introspection, all these different things. And so you start thinking around what that experience means. And it's like this reckoning of who am I and where am I at? And so having the privilege to not only attend, but then lead that and then deliver sort of a talk to like 60 and 70 of my peers around what my reality was and what I was dealing with was huge. It was a really emotional experience. It was extremely vulnerable and moving. And it just put you on the spot to be real. I mean, there was no sort of way to, at least in my mind, there was no sort of way to cheapen or, manufacture those feelings or that experience. I'm sitting here and we're out in the woods somewhere and I don't have my cell phone and it's me and you and three other people and we're in a circle and we're talking. And, we're not in the library or out in the football field. We're not in gym class. We're not cracking jokes. It's kind of like this moment of, let's be serious and let's be honest. And so the build up to that experience, the relationships I built with my fellow leaders, trying to give back and be part of, community-based efforts, it all got me thinking around what is it that's unique around me and what perspective can I offer and how can I connect with people? And so that was my sort of segue into just caring around what people have going on and how can I be of service or help in some sort of way.
Incredible. I also went and led a Kairos retreat.
Oh, yeah.
For sure. Yeah. That was unreal. I mean, I still go back to this is actually a good thing I feel like to share with people, because I think that, obviously it involves a lot of planning and nuance, but the whole crux of it is this moment where you receive messages of love from loved ones.
Yeah.
And man. I think that's something that can be recreated by anybody, which is really cool. Yeah. A friend or a sibling or a partner can kind of facilitate that. Like if you have somebody whose birthday is coming up, getting all their loved ones to write in letters or voice memos, whatever it is, telling them how much they love them and why can be like a bit of a breakthrough moment.
Yeah. I mean, that point you make, I'm not sure how you experience or how you remember that, but I remember laying on my bed, getting all those letters from people in my life and just not being all right in that moment, man. I broke down, I was reading it all and I knew how much my family loved me, how much they were there for me and all the support they gave me over the years. And, I came from a really good and loving family and affirming family, but to see that in that moment and read all those messages and it was overwhelming. And to your point, I think it's something that can easily be recreated and can be a momentous moment for anybody, to kind of experience that and see that. We all know it, but sometimes reading it and experiencing it's a bit different. It's a bit more powerful.
For sure. And I think it gets to the lack of self-expression, especially as men that we're conditioned to. Yeah. Like my dad always tells me he loves me, big hug, which I think I took for granted until I got older, until I learned how many people's fathers are not comfortable saying that or expressing that or even being silly, showing emotion, laughing at themselves. Yeah. And that kind of gets at the underlying situation for men in our country, which is that we're kind of told to suffer silently in some way. I think like the way that comes out then is that the men who are feeling told to shut up and deal with it, then lash out and they will abuse, verbally, sexually, physically, whomever they can in some way. That's a very simplified conception, but that's kind of, I feel like the big flow chart.
Yeah, no, I mean 100%. And I think this concept of men trying to hold in and to repress themselves in some sort of way because they're not comfortable, they don't feel psychologically safe enough to express what they have going on is extremely harmful, not only to themselves, but to other people in society, to your point, where others then suffer abuse as a result of their lack of processing and their lack of feeling and their lack of validating their emotions, right? And so that's a huge issue, right? And one thing I even say is I take it a step further, and you look at like even a D&I lens, and you look around what that means. I think about that for myself as a Black man and my place in society and what that means and how I'm casted and how I'm portrayed, and the fact that I'm supposed to be the most hyper-masculine person in society, and people view us as these dominant, strong people. And even though we're dominant and we're strong, we're still repressed because we're not white and we don't have access to those spaces, and we still suffer and we don't have that privilege. And so there's just so much hardship that goes with that. And I have a ton of privilege in terms of the life that was put before me and the family that I was born into, which I am eternally grateful for. But I look around and when I am sort of volunteering in the community and trying to help other people around, my heart breaks when I'm talking to some of these kids, or I see some of the things that are happening where I'm like, man, people I'm seeing that 13 or 14 years old are frustrated, man. They're mad and they don't know where to go with it, and they don't know how to use it in a positive way or channel that in a positive way. And so I try to have conversations. I try to say, hey, what's going on? Let's talk and let's figure out, what we can do to help. But it goes beyond just, small interactions like that. I feel like it's so challenging and so hurtful to see that. The one thing I will say that I think is really positive is a lot of initiatives being done right now in terms of getting younger Black men and younger Black boys involved in meditation and yoga. It's just introspection and self-reflection activities, breathing stuff, just something like that can be extremely beneficial, right? And I don't have the exact article or recollection of this, but I remember there was some sort of study done around, I think this was, around men of color, and it could be just be around men, but there was like some sort of correlation between folks that were being sent to detention and being, disciplined in school. And instead of sending them to detention, all they did was like allow them to meditate for like 15 to 20 minutes. And like the percentage of kids that were acting out went down dramatically. Like it was just like, hey, give them a chance to just breathe a bit, to process, to feel, like just let them be. And I want that so badly for all men, but specifically, I think even in a D&I lens, I think around how we're out to be made in society and how we're represented. And I really hope that we can continue to go down that path.
For sure. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's a good thing to acknowledge for white men around how Black men are portrayed and how Black men have to process that portrayal, and that's heavy, dude. And thank you for acknowledging that. And I hope that my fellow white fellas can wrap our heads around that. And just take a moment to think about how we're portrayed in the media and in the culture compared to our Black brothers, and how would that make you feel?
It's a challenge each and every day, man. And I wouldn't change it for the world personally. I love my Blackness. I love who I am. But it's tough sometimes waking up and everything that's happened in the past year and everything, and seeing that, and then going into work and trying to be strong and going home to, our partners or our spouses or whoever we go home to, and challenging times, challenging situations. But, like I said, it's an honor and something that I, wouldn't trade for anything.
Great attitude. That's a winner's attitude right there.
Yeah.
I like the meditation piece too. And I don't know, for those kids, and everyone has a different situation, what they're dealing with, but just the idea of giving a child the ability to go into their own body, a space where no one else can get into, and to be able to have some control in this crazy life
Yeah, man. I'm so excited you said that, cause I feel like you think around what it means to grow up and so many experiences and so many things that we have as young children, and I reflect back and I think about that, and it's like discipline was always a staple for me growing up, right? So when I would do something wrong, I would get disciplined, and I would be talked to or reprimanded in some sort of way that was supposed to be a deterrent to then future behavior, right? But when I think about what I want for my future children, what I want is if something goes wrong or they act out in some sort of way, let's have a conversation, and let's do like 10 minutes of just some breathing and meditation, and like just some like emotional regulation to the point where, hey, like you did this or you chose to do this, man. Like, are you okay? Like, what's going on with what led you to do that? Are you feeling a bit anxious right now? Are you feeling a bit sad? Are you upset? Are you frustrated? I'm less focused on not having him or her demonstrate that behavior again. I'm more focused on what inspired that behavior, what inspired that choice, and getting to the root of that. And let's talk about that. Let's break that down in a real way. Because at the end of the day, man, like as a kid, everything that's happening around you is being done to you, man. Like you can think that maybe people are trying to listen to you or value your opinion, but so much of your life up to 18 is people creating rules and a hierarchy and dictating terms to you on how you have to be in the life you have to live. And I think it's important to create space for kids to have their own agency, whether it's like bodily autonomy, right? Like not, I think another important topic is not letting anyone just, touch your child or hug your child in any sort of way. Make sure your child's comfortable receiving that or is like that. Maybe some kids don't necessarily want to do all that right now, right? So giving kids back some autonomy in a real way, whether it's when things go wrong or they act out, and helping them work through that in meditation or breathing or conversation, or asking them, do they feel comfortable greeting people right now and being out there, that is extremely important. And I don't know, I got excited when you said that, man. I didn't mean to go on, but I'm all for being in that camp of giving kids the opportunity to feel and to process and to discuss how they're feeling.
100%. That's another great perspective you just given me, just to keep that in mind when I interact with kids. It's a good thing to remember, like kind of being under the thumb of one's parent or guardian or at school or after school, whoever is running the situation, and just kind of just being like, I see you, kid. I'm sorry that you don't have control of your own life yet.
Yeah. Just having the empathy, man. Like, kids in a lot of ways have a lot of things that are great for them, right? Everyone's out trying to support them. Their responsibility is to go to school and to do those things and to have fun in a lot of ways. But it also is still challenging too. I mean, everyone's on you all the time trying to tell you what to do. And so just having that bit of empathy, I think, is extremely healthy and I think positive for kids.
For sure. You're extremely healthy and positive, my friend.
I'm trying.
Love it. Awesome, dude. Well, this is awesome. I think that we could do many, many more episodes in the future. But we'll pivot over to the three things game here for our last segment.
Let's do it.
What are three things you have learned about love?
Oh man, I love this. You'll have to listen to this, or you have to cut me off if I go too far here. I think first and principally, love is wanting the best for the other person you're with, you're seeing, or you're building romantic feelings for. When you really love somebody, it's taking a step back and wanting to see them blossom and bloom and step into their greatness. And sometimes that means not being a part of that equation. Sometimes you love someone, it isn't the right fit and it isn't the right deal, but you're happy to see them off on their own journey and to do that, right? So I think love is selfless in that way. I think principally first it's focusing on what's best for the other person, right? I think the second thing I'd say is love is difficult. Love is difficult because there's, in my mind, a couple of different things that happen in the process of creating and evolving and nurturing love. You fall in love, which is rather easy. That kind of happens over the sort of first 6 to 9, 12 months of relationship. You get the sort of honeymoon phase. You're liking each other. You're seeing each other in the best way possible. But then it gets challenging. You see someone's faults, you see their shortcomings, you see all these different things that maybe you didn't realize at first that aren't ideal for you. You have to choose each and every day to love that person and to be there for them and to see them and to validate and appreciate them. And that's difficult. That's not something that's natural. You have to choose that each and every day. It's an active decision to love someone. You feel at first, but then you have to choose after that. So I say love is difficult. The last thing I probably say is that it makes the human experience special. I mean, love is special, man. Like when you find it and you find that person that you love, it's this like euphoria that is absolutely unbelievable, hard to describe. You open yourself up to someone in such a real way that it's hard to even put into words. I'm like struggling on how to really say it, but it's something that we all should experience and all should create space for in a way that's authentic and real. And, pivoting away from, personas and who we think we are, or these pipe dreams we're trying to sell someone, we're really need to step into who am I and how do I bring that out in each and every interaction? And how do I have someone that's going to celebrate that and acknowledge that and see me for that. Right. So it's an indescribable feeling when you find that right person. And, I'll leave it at that. I have some more things to say, but I want to be pretty brief. Hopefully that's helpful for three things.
That's incredible. You should look at poetry as a side gig, man.
I used to write, man, back when I was at GW. I took some classes.
Nice.
For a little bit, but you know what? I figured that after a while I was talking about the same things and the same stuff. And I was like, you know what? This isn't for me, but I enjoyed it for what it was.
Hey, I'm sure your perspectives have changed since then, and I'm sure there's a lot more you could write about if you want to revisit it.
Maybe so, man. Maybe this will be the inspiration for me to step back into that. I appreciate that.
For sure. Okay, here's mine. What are 3 things I have learned about leadership? Yeah, I mean, I think to potentially give ourselves both a pat in the back, I'm going to go ahead and say we're both leaders, Nico, in our own ways. I can see that in you for sure. And I know that I enjoy that. So the first one I'll say is that I've learned that whenever I have that gut feeling that a situation needs some leadership, to lean into it. It's kind of similar to what we talked about with discussing sensitive topics and white people acknowledging race. If I have that feeling of leading into it, I should lean into it because someone else is probably having that same feeling too, and they may not go ahead. Like if we all wait around for someone to step up and organize or lead a conversation, it'll never happen.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So the second thing I have learned is that sometimes leading is letting someone else lead, and I would say my my first time I realized that was in rugby, because I love rugby. I've been playing since high school. I still play. And I've been in various leadership roles on my teams. And I think at first, once I first got that taste of leadership from like being a captain or being on the organization side, I liked it. I liked the prestige. I liked the power and the influence and being someone among my peer group that was in a position of authority. And then actually on my current rugby team, it's a gay and inclusive team, right? And so being in that space as a straight guy is kind of interesting. And, I have people in my life who challenge me on that, who say, dude, like, why are you in that space? It's a gay team. You're a straight guy, which, I know my reaction is also to be defensive of my position there, but I appreciate the pushback. Like I appreciate acknowledging it at least and acknowledging like this isn't my space necessarily.
Yeah.
But anyway, so the lesson there is like there was a moment where I was the captain of that team for a while, and then I became a co-captain when another guy developed up and got into a leadership position, and I had to check myself and be like, oh yeah, I'm a straight guy, and this is a gay team, and this is not my space. Like I probably shouldn't be the face of this organization.
That's great reflection, man. Very introspective. I'm glad you arrived at that, right? Where it's like, how do I play a part in helping here or aiding here, but also realizing that this isn't meant for me and that I can play a role, but I probably should take a step back sometimes.
For sure.
Yeah.
And then Number 3, what have I learned about leadership? Dude, a lot of people who are leaders should not be in the positions of leadership.
Also very true.
Like, oh my God. Like, it can be brutal, as we've seen. But yeah, I would say those things, man. That's a great topic, leadership. I think that it is kind of a buzzword. It's a bit of, it's like, man, I think the culture has recognized the necessity of it, but we don't have a very nuanced perspective on it.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of books, business books around emotional intelligence and true leadership. And I feel like it's getting better, but I still think it's a lot of like pop psychology. And I think there's going to be hopefully more nuance and more of a high quality analysis of what leadership is in our generation, of thought leaders. Yeah.
Absolutely, man. I think that's necessary. I think there's to your point, a lot of folks generate tons of conversation around it. It's discussed, it's thought through, but there still is a lot of folks that are very ineffective leaders that are leading organizations or are stuck in middle management. And again, just putting my HR hat back on, when you think around having ineffective leaders that sit within the middle of an organization, it provides challenges not only to leadership, but also to junior colleagues in terms from an engagement perspective, wanting to be there, having success, feeling motivated, all those different things. And so more research is certainly needed. More conversations need to happen because we're not there yet. So I couldn't agree more. Awesome,
Nico. Dude, well, thank you so much for being on the pod. I hope you enjoyed your experience. It was a treat to talk with you.
It was wonderful, Thomas. I appreciate you having me, man. Great concept here, great work, and keep it going.
Thanks, dude. Thanks for the encouragement. I appreciate it.
100%.
Boom, there it is. Love to see it. A couple of dudes being guys right there, showing each other some love, support, and a caring ear. Massive thank you to Nico for his awesome contributions and for giving the time to all of us to learn something new. If you've made it this far through the episode, I humbly ask you to give the show a rating on whatever app you are listening to it on. And we'll see you next week on the Nouveau podcast.